History can be erased not with fire and explosions, but with a single careful phrase in a document. It's rewritten so quietly that at first no one notices. There are no gunshots, no shouting, just a change in the wording of a report. A few lines are edited in a summary. One word is removed from a textbook. First, they take your home. Then, the right to be called by your name. Finally, they take away the very ability to remember who you are. At some point, an ordinary day cracks like ice beneath your feet. The government says nothing special has happened. There's no tragedy, it's just a necessary relocation. Paperwork changes faster than wounds heal from the journey. Time seems to go off the rails. Archives are closed for restoration. Funds are optimized. Cases disappear quietly, without explanation. In their place come new documents, new certificates, new reports. They no longer include words like forced eviction, collective guilt, or repressed people. There are just neutral phrases, safety measures, decisions by authorities, population redistribution. Years go by. Different people live in the same houses, on the same streets, with the same view from the window. But in their passports and forms, it says indigenous population, permanent residents. The official version has always been this way. Meanwhile, those who were taken away remain in the documents as a line in a table. They get just a few words. Relocated as an unreliable element. Without reasons, without faces, without mentioning where and under what conditions they were sent. The right to return disappears with just one signature on a decree. But violence doesn't fade away just because it stops being reported. The more the authorities erase the memory of the people, the more they have to lie. Each new lie demands another. The layer of paper covering it all gets thicker, and the holes in the overall picture of the past become more noticeable. Why are dozens of old names disappearing from maps? Why are cemeteries declared abandoned sites? Why is there no mention of the people who lived along the front lines in military reports only to vanish from all records? When you line up these whys, the puzzle just doesn't fit. The official story sounds smooth, but it falls apart on the details. Another story emerges, one that they tried to bury under concrete, along with houses, schools, and entire villages. Ethnic cleansing is not just about trains, convoys, and 3 hours to pack. It's also a special language of bureaucracy, a language that hides violence behind neat phrases. In this language, people become contingents. Families turn into units of account. An entire nation is labeled as a problem to be solved. In the NKVD tables, new columns appear: number, age, work capacity. In the orders, keywords are vague, but the essence is crystal clear. On the maps, the boundaries of neighborhoods change, familiar place names disappear, and entire communities are erased. The land itself seems to forget those who once lived here. Who signed these documents? What laws were referenced? What phrases were chosen to justify the removal of hundreds of thousands of people? This story begins with 3 hours that someone tried very hard to erase from reality. In the magazines, for those 3 hours, it seemed like the world was running smoothly, just as it should, without a single hitch. On paper, everything looked perfect. Trains were on schedule, shifts started on time. The duty officers took over and handed off their posts, recorded the air temperature, the condition of the tracks, and communication notes. Neat lines, tidy numbers, the same handwriting. A picture of a proper, obedient day. But the longer you look at these pages, the more one thing stands out. Almost nothing is happening. In the time that's usually filled with notes, we see the same short phrases repeated here. No changes. Situation normal. Sometimes just a dash. And it goes on like this, across several sites and different agencies. For a busy road or a lively system, this is not normal. A healthy shift always has some ups and downs, minor glitches, delays, calls, someone running late, someone asking questions. But here, it's just a flat line, like an EKG, where the heart has stopped beating. The most unpleasant part starts when you flip through the magazines further, the day before and the day after. Everything there is alive. Before that, it's just a jumble of notes. Some people wrote in a hurry, others were unclear, with mistakes and scribbles in the margins. Afterward, it's the same. Detailed comments, messy handwriting, different phrasings. And only those 3 hours stand out from the rest, like a neatly retouched piece. It's as if someone went over them with an eraser, wiping away everything unnecessary, and then laid a smooth template on top. But the system didn't work everywhere. At one station, in the middle of this normal situation, there's a lonely phrase, connection unstable, line busy. No explanations, no notes about fixing it, no signature from the duty officer nearby. Then it goes back to no changes, as if someone suddenly remembered to use the right words. This short line looks like a nervous twitch on a perfectly smooth face. In the communication log for the same date, there's the same strange symmetry. Standard phrases, familiar abbreviations, everything by the book. And then, an uneven handwriting, a noticeably different pressure. Channel unavailable, waiting. Later, in a different hand, fixed, it's working. But the timing doesn't match the overall picture. It seems they fixed it after it should have been done. The note is like a band-aid, stuck on after the fact, trying to cover up the gap where the connection dropped at the worst possible moment. In the section that oversaw this area, there's just emptiness for the required period. The page with the notes from that time has been torn out so neatly that there are no frayed edges or scraps left on the spine. It's just a clean break, as if the page never existed. The next page starts with a cheerful phrase, "Shift completed. No incidents reported." On paper, it looks calm, but in reality, it's not order. It's silence put on display. A medical journal, usually filled with minor calls and everyday injuries, shows just one entry during these 3 hours. Response on request. Route not specified. There's a paramedic's signature and the time of departure. They have learned to kill so quickly that death itself can't keep up with their schedule. Experts sit down with the reports like they're solving a math problem. Before them are numbers, tables, and time. But behind each line is someone's final minute. They place clocks, protocols, and movement reports side by side. And they see, this place will never be the same. The closer they get to the order, the tighter the events compress. Between the team and the first body on the ground, there are just a few minutes. Between the first body and an entire vanished block, it's less than an hour. Life is squeezed into a short span, where there's no room for escape or salvation. In ordinary life, it's not like this. There's a road, there's preparation, there is resistance, mistakes, delays. Here, it's almost a straight line, as if someone has mapped out exactly when and who will cease to exist. A regular day shatters like thin glass, and behind it, nothingness. On paper, it looks dry. Initiation. That's the moment when hope fades, even though no one knows it yet. Arrival. A few lines later, events completed. Not a single extra word. But when you look at the evidence behind these 3 lines, it becomes clear. Under the neutral phrase, events have taken place, there's always the same story, mass disappearances of those who were previously listed in closed records. Experts dig deeper. They take a small town and analyze how its population changes on the charts. There were a certain number of residents from a specific group. 3 hours later, the number is different. A day later, it's almost 0. The difference hasn't vanished. Someone made it happen, following orders and a plan. The more they repeat this calculation in different areas, the clearer the same pattern emerges. There's a moment when someone at the top says, "Go." There's a gap, ranging from a few minutes to an hour. Then it's a steep drop. The number of people falls down, like on a slope. The graphs from different places almost line up with the same curves. In one area, this curve closely matches the schedule of troop movements. In one case, there's a plan for cleanup. In another, there are reports about stabilizing the situation. The words are different, but the meaning is the same. After these statements, there are fewer people left on the map. The documents call it order. The reality is disappearance. What matters is not just the order itself, but when it's given. If the command is issued at night, by morning, the necessary homes are already empty. If it's given in the morning, an entire neighborhood disappears by evening. People are not evacuated or relocated, they just stop existing. The reports only change the numbers, as if we're talking about a warehouse, not lives. Investigators try to approach it from a different angle. They take lists of those who miraculously survived. They compare the timing of their accounts with the official reports. And once again, there's that same gap of 3 hours. Before it, life, even if it's terrifying, with names, habits, and addresses. After it, nothingness, where there are no names, no homes, and no traces left. They see how the system first blurs people in documents. At first, it's general categories. Then, it's impersonal labels. After that, it's just numbers. And at some point, those numbers start to disappear faster than they can be typed. They weren't erased by explosions or fire. They were first wiped away with a pencil. At first, it all seems minor. Someone edits a map. Someone rewrites a list. Someone changes one word in a report. No one is shouting. No one is crying. Just a hand quietly moving across the paper. This is how the end begins, though it goes unnoticed for a long time. The story of this tragedy can be summed up in 3 steps. First, a map, then an order, and finally, silence. People weren't wiped out instantly. They were quietly removed from the records. No noise, no smoke, no blood. Names vanished from the lists. Villages disappeared from the blueprints. Entire families turned into lines without faces. Remember this: paper always comes first. The investigation reveals that everything starts long before the train cars, the nighttime knocks on the door, and the shouts on the platform. It begins in the documents. In reports, people turn into numbers. In summaries, they become categories. In official charts, they are nameless dots that can easily be pushed aside. The less human they seem, the easier it is to move, sort, and erase them. The day before the disaster, the area looks ordinary, and that's the coldest horror of all. Roads, villages, markets. Children run to the river. Old folks argue about the weather and prices. Women haggle over flour and fabric. There are no signs that this is their last normal day. Life goes on confidently, as if there are still dozens of mornings like this ahead. But if you look at the closed maps during these same days, they no longer match reality. The markets still buzz, the hearths still smoke, and voices still echo. Yet on the blueprints, certain villages and streets are already muted, outlined and marked, but without names. It's as if someone pulled them out of the future, leaving empty spots behind. These pages have already decided who won't be here. Their world is still alive, but in the documents, it has already been sentenced. Outside, it's the usual world. Inside the folders, there's a different reality, where part of this world has already been erased. And this paper reality becomes the main one. Real life adjusts to it, like a mold. People still walk their paths, but in the reports, they are already listed as displaced. And after that, arguing with the map is almost impossible. You open a regular atlas, and it looks like thousands of others. Small towns with tricky names, winding river lines, passes where cattle have been driven for centuries, graveyards with stones carved with names in a dying language. On paper, it's just dots and lines. In life, it's a whole world held together by memory and words. Every mark on the map means something, even if it's just a tiny black dot on the diagram. Every hill has its own meaning. Every path has its own story. Here, in the summer, people gather for a celebration, bake bread, shear sheep, and sing old songs. Here, someone meets secretly at night. For centuries, the same actions, rituals, and phrases have been repeated. People believe that tomorrow will be just like yesterday, because that's how it has always been. And at that very moment, their future is already being rewritten somewhere else. In this contrast lies the key to understanding. The day before the strike, everything is still normal. A woman hides something in a chest. At 9:17, this community still existed, but by 12:14, it was gone. The most chilling part isn't the scale, but the precision. No natural disaster, no everything happened suddenly. From this point, the story splits in two. Just 3 hours, broken down, minute by minute, like a cold, foreign plan. Then, investigators will sift through thousands of pages, telegrams, memos, meeting minutes. They will compare the timing of the strikes, orders, and pauses. And it will become clear, this was not a collapse, but a gradual shutdown of an entire country. Not with one explosion, but through a series of decisions. Some of these decisions were made even before the first shot was fired. 9 o'clock. A typical morning. People are having breakfast, complaining about the news, getting their kids ready. The kettle is boiling, and the usual chatter is on the television. Some are running late for work, while others are finishing up reports. This place will never recognize itself again. No one knows this is their last normal cup of tea. A regular day is cracking, but only at the seams that no one can see. A few hours away, another morning is unfolding with a different plan. They don't turn on the TV there. They check the connection, the time, the coordinates. They're not looking at the weather forecast, but at the target list. They already understand that by noon, the map of the region will look different. 9/11. The first red light comes on at the headquarters. Intelligence reports. There's movement, looks like training. The word training sounds calm, almost lazy. In the room, people nod. It's nothing new. No need to panic. The report is wrapped up in the usual format. We're observing, we're clarifying. So the first signal is neatly filed away under nothing special. At that moment, other data could have come in. Harsher, more alarming. Intercepts, satellite images, analysts' assessments. But they're held back for clarification. So the morning routine isn't disrupted. Silence feels wiser than anxiety. The first signal fades into the background, and from this background, the countdown begins. 9:23. Border posts report. Equipment at the border. Columns, heavy armor, trucks. Someone says, "They're trying to intimidate us. The pressure is on. We've seen this before." Confidence rings louder than anxiety, and it becomes the biggest mistake of the morning. Overnight, several local radars in this area were turned off for maintenance. The repair dates were chosen seemingly at random. In the reports, it looks like just another date. But in the closed materials, it doesn't seem like a coincidence anymore. Blind spots appear exactly where the first breakthroughs will happen in an hour, where neither sirens nor warnings will work. 9:31. A brief command goes out over the internal lines. Do not escalate. The wording is soft, almost toothless. It means do not raise the threat level, do not wake those who are still asleep. While everything seems calm up top, down below, time is slipping away. 9:37. A regular meeting is happening in the government. They're arguing about the budget, percentages, and plans for the year. In the next room, a receiver picks up military frequencies, but the door remains closed. Official documents are laid out, regulations, agendas, signatures. In the margins of the paperwork, there are notes. Do not disturb until official confirmation. Avoid sharp wording. Between the lines, it means one thing. Let the world remain quiet for just a little longer. 3 hours. That's all it takes to erase an entire world from existence, leaving only a strange silence and a few forgotten things buried in the ground. 3 hours is not a battle or an operation, not a heroic assault or a grand war. It's a quiet, routine destruction of people, homes, and habits. It's as if someone is carefully erasing line by line, like text in an old draft. After such cleanups, there are no majestic ruins to showcase in textbooks. There are no picturesque remnants, no footage to include in the news. What remains is silence, ringing in your ears. The very silence that settles in places where just yesterday neighbors were arguing, dogs were barking, someone was singing in the kitchen, and people were debating by the fence. When we started gathering data from different regions, a strange pattern emerged. In the areas of the toughest operations, the silence followed the same template. It was as if it was laid over life like a pre-prepared stencil. This emptiness became a marker. Someone lived here, and now they are gone. The more clues we uncovered from the archives, the clearer the same pattern emerged. The same hand, the same handwriting. The trail of blood and ash is not just a metaphor. It's a real path we can trace. From a name in an archive folder to a charred spoon found in the grass on an abandoned lot. From a dry line in a report to an old photograph stitched into the lining of a coat that was never picked up. At first, these discoveries seemed random, like disconnected episodes. But analysis revealed that the paths converge at the same points, as if someone had drawn a map in advance. You can follow this trail like an invisible road. But this road isn't drawn, it's burned by fire and fear. Here is a village that no longer even appears in the records. Once, there was a name, familiar faces, a daily routine, its own celebrations, and its own little troubles. Now, it's just a gray field with a few bushes by the roadside. At first glance, it looks like just another piece of abandoned land, of which there are many. But if you dig a little at the edge and hit a hard layer with a shovel, fragments start to surface. Burned glass, pieces of brick mixed with dirt, animal bones mixed with ash, and nearby, a small child's button that shouldn't be in the middle of a clean field. These details stick in your memory more than any dates or orders. The investigation shows that similar discoveries are happening at dozens of locations along the same line. 3 hours leave no monuments or official memorials. They leave behind small items that chill the blood, because behind each object is someone who will never be named again. One family, one home that will never recognize itself again. The name is on the list, but the house is gone. In the archive, there are 3 lines: arrival, event, cleanup completed. Between the first line and the last, there are those 3 hours that can erase an entire life. On paper, it's just a time frame, a brief note. In reality, it's broken conversations, an unfinished letter, an untouched drink. They weren't just killed. They were planned like a supply of raw materials. On paper, everything looked absurdly neat. Straight lines, clear dates, calm wording. No signs that behind those numbers, people were screaming. Not a word about fear. Not a word about those who didn't have time to pack their things. Not a word about those 3 hours when the village was first surrounded, then burned, and finally wiped out completely. The reports only mention movements, volumes, and routes. It's as if they were talking about cargo and logistics, not about erasing entire places from memory. From this moment on, time will flow through blood. This is where the investigation hit the main knot. On the ground, there's chaos, smoke, screams, charred walls, and empty yards. In the paperwork, everything is perfectly organized. Not a single mistake. Not a single anxious comma. It's as if someone calculated in advance how to package the worst into the calmest language. This is where the lie becomes the official version. This discrepancy became the first thread. If everything fell apart in the villages in 3 hours, why did the documents show everything running on schedule without delays or emergencies, as if it were just a regular work process? If they called it the spontaneity of war, why did this spontaneity have a clear plan, signatures from those responsible, and neat tables laid out for several weeks ahead? When they started to line up the dates, a too neat pattern emerged. A few weeks before 3 o'clock, orders were already going out in the region. Prepare the rolling stock, clear the tracks, reroute regular cargo, and cancel some passenger services. Officially, it was for repairs, training, and network overload. Oil, coal, and freight. everything suddenly started temporarily changing routes. These gaps in the schedule were later filled with trains that weren't mentioned in any official documents. From there, the chain only grew stronger. We found matches between the night columns and the pre-signed acts for temporary use of vehicles. On paper, it's support for industry and the military. In reality, dozens of cars would leave at night and come back empty. The roads weren't blocked randomly. Here's a section that was closed at night for repairs. Here's a bridge that was closed for structural checks. Here's a detour that suddenly became the only option. Every time these repairs happened, the same pattern of disappearance emerged. The archival notes, written in a dull, tired handwriting, gradually formed a different picture. Where there was once just war, a system began to reveal itself. Where it seemed like improvisation, it turned out to be a pre-planned script. In the old protocols, there were phrases that didn't bother anyone back then. Streamlining processes, unloading the infrastructure, reducing the turnaround time of trains. But when we plugged in real routes and dates, it became clear flows referred to those they intended to erase from the map. And then it became obvious. Those who were planning were not living in panic mode. They weren't acting in haste. They already knew how many people could be evacuated in a night. 3 hours. And the state pretended those people had never existed. At first, it all seems like just a regular disaster, a mistake, a failure, someone's misfortune, which later gets brushed off as circumstances. The news reports familiar words: tragedy, loss, unforeseen incident. In the early hours, no one talks about blame, only about sympathy and shock. And for many, that's enough to settle down. They didn't manage, didn't foresee, couldn't handle it. But this narrative starts to crack as soon as closed files come into play. There's no panic, no confused questions, no attempts to figure out what went wrong. Instead, there are dry lines, a steady tone, and clear statements. The reports show no confusion, only order. It feels like no one at the top is surprised, as if this has all been discussed before. And now they've just pulled out the right script from the drawer. Timing matters just as much as the content. Outside, they keep saying it all happened suddenly, and no one had time to react. But in the documents, the rhythms are different. Recorded calls made hours before the strike. Specific names of those who were warned in advance. Notes on who should be informed in general, and who should be kept completely in the dark. Time is broken down by the minute, by agreements, by visas. This no longer feels like a natural disaster. It feels like a situation that was seen on the horizon and consciously left unaddressed. The language of internal documents reveals attitudes better than any slogans. In public speeches, there is grief, pain, and national tragedy. In official reports, we see terms like collateral damage, unintended consequences, and adjustment of metrics. People become numbers, regions turn into zones, and lives are reduced to rows in spreadsheets. One document even states, "The level of risk is deemed acceptable." Below it, there is a neat signature, a date, and a registration number. Everything is done correctly, without a single mistake. There's a whole section on how to talk about what happened. In the investigation materials, a document appears listing forbidden words. No more destruction, only local incidents. No people, just the population of the area. No culture, only intangible assets. They change the language, shift the context, and alter the very picture of what occurred. One decision erases not just bodies, but also names, language, and memory. This isn't just a way of speaking, it's a mechanism of erasure built into official language. The deeper the investigation goes, the bigger the gap between two realities becomes. To the outside world, they repeat, the incident is not systemic. This phrase travels from report to report, turning into a mantra. But in closed reports from the same day, it's clear as day. Similar scenarios were considered, and the risks were deemed manageable. It also lists the territories, timelines, and possible scales. For some, this is the end of their world. For others, it's just one of the planned scenarios. On paper, it looks like a work in progress. In reality, it feels like a point of no return. Meanwhile, the survivors wander among the ruins, trying to find traces of hope. The system did everything it could to erase the order, but the consequences were too real to hide. The investigation revealed this is not chaos or improvisation. It's a well-oiled machine, with precise steps, with clear roles, not a single unnecessary detail that could be used in court later. First, there's a blank slate. No signature, no strict wording, not a single line to grab onto. On the surface, it's as if nothing is happening. But beneath it all, across the country, everything suddenly started to move. The same actions over and over again, at the same time, with the same consequences. Officially, it was called local initiative. But in reality, it was just following an order that no one ever saw. The plan wasn't born in documents. It came to life in rooms with no witnesses, where the doors are locked from the inside, where phones lie face down, where no minutes are taken and no recordings are made, where every word must vanish right after it's spoken. A small group gathered at the top. According to the legend, it was a working discussion of a complex situation. In reality, it was about agreeing on things that couldn't be put in writing. They didn't speak directly. Instead, they used code. Safe, carefully chosen phrases were heard. The situation raises serious concerns. We need to take action. A strong response is necessary. On paper, it looked like general musings, but everyone at the table understood. This was not a discussion. This is the start of the operation. This is where the chain began. From here, rough intentions turned into smooth paperwork. Without words like cleansing, deportation, or liquidation, the high-ranking officials wrote neatly and evenly, just like in a textbook: increase control, ensure order, carry out a set of measures. Formally, it was a collection of vague phrases. In reality, it was a carefully coded order. The meaning was hidden in the details, in the choice of words. What was in the text and what was left for verbal discussion. There was no need to explain to their own. They read between the lines. Others thought it was just another boring document. The middle management had long learned this language. They didn't need any explanations. Just seeing familiar phrases like escalation, threat to stability, and the use of tough measures is allowed was enough for them. They knew what was behind it. They had learned from past campaigns, based on unspoken rules, how the same phrases always ended in the same way. In the records, these moments seemed harmless. Short sentences, neat wording, no extremes. But it was exactly where the documents had ellipses or dry dashes that the real message was found. The things that never made it to paper. The things conveyed only through voice and glance. That's where personal connections came into play. Phones, no notes. Conversations, no specifics. You understand the seriousness of the moment. The higher-ups are very unhappy with the situation. They expect quick results. The words are vague, but the message is crystal clear. Act fast and decisively. That's how it went from people disappearing in 3 hours to being labeled a planned operation in the paperwork. At first, everything seemed proper: plans, orders, neat lists. In the offices, they didn't say people. They said contingent, element, units. They listed the living like inventory. While they aligned the lines, lives were already being erased. The scariest part wasn't the screams, but the silence. Bureaucracy always operates quietly. No screams, no blood, just forms, and the signature of the responsible party. The drier the text, the easier it is to hide the dirty work behind it. On paper, everything looked neutral, almost harmless. This seeming normality became the main cover-up. The mechanics of disappearance started with a simple question. How many are there? Not who are they, not what will happen to them. just a number, separated from faces, biographies, and the past. From this cold counting began the erasure of people from reality. Then the number became the norm. Here's the plan for removal. Here's the percentage of undesirables. Here's the limit on evictions. The phrasing sounded as if it were about cargo. Numbers were rising, and with them, confidence grew that everything was going as it should. At the top sat those known as the decision-makers. But more often, they were just signing off on reports. They received tables and added their signatures. They got summaries and demanded better results. The bigger the numbers, the more successful the work seemed. In this logic, the disappearance of people turned into meeting targets. Down below, everything revolved around paperwork, too. The boss demanded the plan be completed. The executor asked for the list. The secretary typed up the names. The names turned into case numbers. The case numbers became faceless entries. With each step, the meaning drifted further away from real people. Between the main point and the subpoint, what mattered most was lost. These were individuals, with their own language, customs, homes, and cemeteries. The reports had no columns for memory or pain. They only had arrived, departed, and liquidated. Paper did not record empty houses or silent graves, only the movement of units. The operation took 3 hours, but it was years in the making. First, there was data collection, then the identification of a special group. After that came restrictions, checks, and separate lists. People were pulled from the general records and moved to the surplus column in advance. By the time that column grew large enough, no one questioned whether it was acceptable. Every step seemed legal. There's a ruling, so everything's fine. There's a stamp, so everything's by the book. The meaning of decisions was hidden behind the paperwork. What mattered wasn't what they did, but how they did it. Paper turned violence into a procedure, and crime into a measure of state necessity. The real horror wasn't just with those giving the orders. The horror lay with the thousands of people who were just processing. Those who said, "I'm not making any decisions, I'm just filling out forms." This phrase stretched like a chain from the local police department to the ministry. Each person contributed a small part to a great disappearance. From the sum of these small actions, a tragedy was born, which would later be called historical. In just 3 hours, an entire nation vanished from the records, as if it had never existed. The investigation revealed that the massacre was hidden not by silence, but by words, not by screams or bans, but by a careful truth that stripped away all that was alive. At this moment, history splits in two. That's how it made it into reports and broadcasts, as if everything was going according to plan, as if it wasn't a disaster, but just another part of the workflow, another line on the schedule. A few hours after the villages were destroyed, the first notes came out. A narrow column on the side. No photos, no names, no scale, just another minor news item that the eye glides past. Armed conflict in a remote area. The situation is under control. A few people have died. A few, when hundreds were already on the ground, and within a day, the count was in the thousands. With that first phrase, the tragedy was reduced to a mere statistic. The radio continued, as if it were just another day. The same calm voice, the same tone, as if talking about rain, not about a whole world that had just been wiped off the map. And that calmness sounded scarier than any panic. As a result of a clash with extremist elements, a successful operation was carried out to restore order. The term extremists has been attached to those who no longer exist. Their language, faith, songs, and homes have all been compressed into one convenient word that makes it easy to justify the violence. When you say extremist, there's no need to explain why they were killed. There's no need to remember their name, their family, or their past. In that one word, biography, fear, and choice vanish. In one word, questions fade away. The lie began with a map. On paper, there's a small spot, a couple of roads, a few villages, sparsely populated area. But in reality, it's land where people have lived for centuries, with their own way of life and memories. Yet, in reports, this place appeared almost empty. If the area is sparsely populated, it means there are few victims. If there are extremists, it means there aren't really any victims. If it's called a stabilization operation, it means everything was done right. Step by step, they built a logical trap where the most important thing disappeared: the people themselves. Official reports painted a smooth picture. The world is restored. The area is cleared of illegal groups. In these phrases, there were no elderly, no children, no women, no homes, no cemeteries, no schools, no names. Just groups and clearing, words that conveniently hide the ashes. When you read such text, you don't see ruins. You see a neat report of a job well done. Paper doesn't smell like smoke. It doesn't shout or cry. Newspapers echoed each other, like a copy. The same lines appeared in every issue. No one dared to add an extra number. No one asked out loud how many really died. At most, there was a dry statement. There are casualties among the civilian population. No numbers, no stories, no faces. It was as if the words themselves were afraid to reach the truth and stopped halfway. The radio gradually built a legend around the operation. The word massacre was never mentioned. Neither was people. Instead of referring to individuals, they used terms like group, element, and object. Instead of mourning, it was all about stabilizing the situation. This story is more dangerous than the disaster itself because it teaches how to quietly and silently kill the truth. The newspapers came out as usual. The same pages, the same sections, the same dull headlines. But inside, a subtle replacement took place. Instead of harsh words about cleansing and formation, we heard softer phrases like a tragic turn of events and an unforeseen conflict. On the surface, everything seemed familiar, but the meaning shifted so much that there were no longer any guilty parties. Now, listen to those who survived. The official version sounded careful and nearly flawless. The outburst was random. The failure was tragic. The system responded quickly. It seemed like everyone did everything they could. On paper, it's not a disaster, but an unfortunate accident. It's not the result of decisions and delays, but a twist of fate that no one could predict or prevent. This is how tragedy fades into the background. The personal becomes anonymous. Decisions turn into circumstances. Remember these faces. They will return. But in fate's archives, there's not a single document. There are only people and their signatures. Open not a fresh issue, but an old folder, and the picture starts to crack. No drama, just dates, visas, incoming and outgoing, and empty spaces where explanations should be. These gaps reveal the truth. The story was not just lived, but rewritten. Investigators quickly realized that the key was not in what was printed, but in what was crossed out. The silence in the documents spoke louder than any headlines. 3 days before the disaster, a report was filed. The wording was straightforward. The situation was unstable. Mass unrest is possible. Reinforcements are needed. The document has been registered, visas have been issued, and red receipts have been noted. This is not a rumor or a retelling. It is a recorded warning. There is no public record of this report. It does not appear in briefings or official reports. Later, the same people will say on camera, "We didn't know." The archives provide a clear answer. They knew, and they knew in advance. This is the moment when hope fades, and chance stops being a coincidence. The next layer is the Commission's protocol. The version that made it into the reports looks proper. They acted within their authority. The situation developed rapidly. Comprehensive measures were taken. The wording gives the impression that everyone was honestly fighting against the problem, but just couldn't keep up. Responsibility is spread out, and the phrasing is softened. The picture is crafted so that the viewer is left with no tough questions. In storage, there's another copy, a draft. In the margins, there are crossed-out phrases, ignored warnings, team delayed for 2 hours, responsibility not assigned. Next to them, handwritten notes say, remove, soften, do not specify. These words weren't just overlooked. They were intentionally taken out, along with the details and names. This is how real decisions turned into an impersonal system. It's not about who signed it, but some kind of collective machine. It's not about who failed to give the order, but a so-called complex situation, a separate line for telegrams. There are no general statements here. There is time. 3 hours before the disaster, an urgent request goes out. The situation is critical. We ask for permission. The most terrible crimes always come quietly, disguised as neat papers and proper wording. At first, it's just folders, yellowed pages, seals, signatures, numbers. It looks like ordinary bureaucratic work. But if you sort everything by dates, in order, it becomes clear. At some point, someone decided that this group of people was no longer people, but a problem. Historians take one document, then another, then a third. They note down dates, names, and phrases. And suddenly, an ordinary year is shattered. Just yesterday, everything was called measures to maintain order. Today, it's an order for eviction. Tomorrow, it's a directive to block roads. In a week, there's a report on the number of people removed. Nearby are papers about confiscating property, about vacant houses, and about transferring belongings for state use. In the margins, there are notes about unreliable elements. At this moment, lawyers lay down another layer. Conventions, statutes, tribunal decisions. No emotions, just text. It clearly states what constitutes the destruction of a group. The intent to erase it as a community, creating unbearable living conditions, denying home, language, the right to return. Persecution based on origin. Each point is like a lamp shining on a specific episode. One light turns on. It shows the eviction order. The second one, the report on road blockades. The third, an internal memo banning returns. When all of them light up at once, there's no way to say, we didn't understand what we were doing. For years, this was called resettlement. A temporary measure. A necessity for safety. But the reality tells a different story. This isn't care, it's pushing people out. It's not chaos, it's a deliberate plan. Deadlines, stages, responsibilities. When it comes to the fate of an entire nation, the report includes a dry line. Change in the demographic situation. And then the language takes center stage. In the working drafts, you can still see the reality. Forbid, deprive, remove, liquidate. In the final version, these words disappear. What remains are regulate, limit, relocate, cease operations. Evict the population turns into organize departure. Prohibit return becomes limit the possibility of arrival. Eliminate settlements turns into reorganize the network of communities. Each of these changes may seem minor, but they can determine whether an event is classified as an international crime. If it's a temporary security measure, that's one perspective. If it's the destruction of a group as such, that's a completely different story. Either way, the country acknowledges its responsibility. It either hides behind words or gets lost in them. Historians bring in rough drafts. They contain strict orders, clear goals, and numbers of losses. In the final version, those lines are crossed out. The statistics are smoothed over. The wording is vague. Where there was a specific group of people, it turns into a faceless category of citizens. Where there was a decision to ban forever, it becomes the issue is subject to further review. This is how the official version is created, step by step. Not in a day. After a series of edits and approvals, 3 hours, and an entire nation is reduced to a blank spot on the map, while the report simply states one word: stable. At first, it really does seem like a mistake, as if someone entered the wrong numbers, mixed up the lines, or mislabeled the borders. Everything looks like a work glitch, an accident, a technical error. But the more we examined the reports, protocols, and closed orders, the clearer it became. This is not a system failure. This is the system itself. On paper, everything looks almost decent. There was one territory, now there's another. The border has shifted a bit, the color on the map has changed, and at the bottom they neatly added status clarification of the region. Just one note in the legend, as if nothing happened, a regular adjustment. But behind that dry term lies a different reality. Burned villages, holes instead of cemeteries, empty houses that will never be opened again with their keys. People who overnight became those who no longer matter in any plan. We checked the time. 3 hours is not just the length of an operation. It's a moment when the balance of power shifts. Yesterday, there was a community here. Language, memory, habits, and our own arguments. Today, there's emptiness, quickly filled with other flags, foreign orders, and a new map. And the deeper we dug into the documents, the clearer one pattern emerged. As soon as people disappear, the first thing that takes their place is the word resource. Not people, not families, not community. It's resource. From that moment on, the land stops being someone's home. It becomes an asset. Fields, mountains, passes, roads, and riverbanks are no longer seen as places to live, but as tools for influence. Miles are no longer tied to anyone's fate. They are viewed as a convenient space for someone else's plans. We followed what happens next. Where families used to live, military units are now stationed. Where schools and temples stood, warehouses, headquarters, and hangars are rising. Old houses are being torn down to make way for new roads that quickly lead vehicles to the updated borderline. In the reports, the area simply gets a new label. Yesterday it was foreign and problematic. Today it's already ours and strategically important. The same hills, the same river, the same bridge. But there's a different status and different owners. At this moment, it becomes clear why everything revolves around more than just people. The people are not just faces and names. They are corridors of influence, mountain passes, valleys, and ports. They are the territory through which oil, weapons, and goods can flow. The routes that make it easy to move troops and equipment without too many questions. When the people are removed, so is the one who says, "This is ours." No one is left to argue about the bridge, the road, or the heights in the mountains. The community that lived here for centuries and knew every trail is gone. What remains is a silent land, easily managed from a distant office. We have risen to those offices. There, far from the front lines, everything is reduced to a neat geography task. There's a region populated by the stubborn, the dangerous, the uncontrollable. On the map, it's just an inconvenient piece that disrupts someone else's plan. One political decision, 3 hours of violence. First, they erase you from existence. Then, they confidently claim you were never there. Under the videos, the same attack played out. Fairy tales. Political agenda. Where's the proof? As if those who remembered the gunshots were supposed to document it all with official papers and signatures. But it's this skepticism that pushed us to dig deeper. If you don't trust words, you'll have to talk to what can't lie. In the past, a witness's story was enough. But now we needed things that couldn't be erased with a comment. Documents, maps, diagrams, reports that don't say, "I thought." That's how new witnesses entered history. Silent, but stubborn. Old land plans, construction documents, classified reports where someone else's death was just a line in a table. Secret orders with numbers, deadlines, and names written in black and white. What the old folks called the night when everyone was taken away looked neat and cold on paper. Cleanup operations, special operation, evacuation of personnel. People became units, villages turned into sites, and shootings were referred to as execution of decisions. But one detail always stood out. The same ravines, the same road intersections, The same no man's fields kept appearing in stories, in classified documents, and in technical reports. Grandchildren and great-grandchildren took the next step. If these places are coded in official texts, they can be uncovered in another way, not by words, but by the land. They started gathering everything that could connect to reality. Hand-drawn maps where the elders marked spots with crosses. They shot here. Fragments of letters, old topographic maps. All these pieces were brought together into one system and compared with what exists today. Where once people were driven to a pit, there are now warehouses. Highways run through the area. Neat fences stretch out. Where executions used to happen, there are industrial zones, vacant lots, and secured areas. At first, it seemed like a coincidence. The country was restructuring, changing, and growing. But the more points they marked on the map, the clearer it became. These coincidences were happening too often and too precisely. That's when satellite images came into play, old and new. We watched how the landscape changed, where mounds appeared, where strangely even hills grew, which were not on the old maps. In one spot, the old man said, "There used to be a pit here, as wide as a house and as long as a street." In modern pictures, it's just smooth green grass. But in the archival aerial photos from that year, right at that spot, you can see a freshly cut clearing, machinery, and signs of earthworks. In another area, the documents mentioned an object in the woods. Old maps showed a clearing. Today, it's a restricted area with no explanation. Officially, there's nothing special there. But satellites captured something different. The roads to this emptiness were being repaired more often than the road to the nearest village. Step by step, a system emerged. It wasn't just about eliminating people, but also about carefully erasing traces from the landscape, the documents, and memory.